Let's dive straight into this one, because it is an absolutely wild ride. We are looking at a source text today that pulls off this incredible juxtaposition. On one hand, you've got code written in Lean, which, as you know, is this ultra-rigorous, formal mathematical programming language used to verify complex proofs. But then, you look at the actual variables and structures inside this code, and they are describing these deeply mystical, cosmic concepts pulled straight from Gnosticism. I mean, we're talking about a literal, formal attempt to code the cosmos.
Now, opening these files, you might expect to see standard software architecture, right? But no. These are actually formal mathematical proofs for some seriously massive conceptual ideas. You'll literally see modules named Circadian Gnosis Alignment sitting right there next to the Boomley Walrus Gnosis certificate. It's fascinating. The authors are taking the absolute unforgiving strictness of computer science and using it to map out a topological philosophy of reality itself.
So, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with decoding the Gnosis Foundations, then move into synchronizing the biological clock. After that, we'll look at the three-pillar ledger, explore the universal +1, and finally, wrap it all up by reducing reality to M2. All right, let's jump right into part 1, decoding the Gnosis Foundations and seeing how they formalize philosophy. You really have to view this codebase as a structural scaffolding. Take this specific file, for example, the Booley-Waller's Gnosis certificate. It is doing way more than just balancing a checkbook. It actually takes these highly theoretical economic and philosophical equilibria and turns them into what the code calls a simultaneous triple ceiling. Basically, it's mathematically proving that goods, institutions, and temporal closure can all balance out perfectly against a shared structural budget. But before we go any further, we really need to nail down this specific term, the Kleeneman. The text defines this as the universal +1. It acts as the departure, the monad, or the absolute beginning that lifts up these foundational structures. You'll definitely want to keep this +1 in mind, because the Kleeneman is basically the foundational keystone for this entire mathematical framework we're exploring. It is literally the spark that makes all of this math actually move.
Moving right along to Section 2, synchronizing the biological clock with time and breath.
12. This number is just incredibly significant in this source text. The code defines this concept called the circadian drift. Now think about it. A standard solar day is exactly 1,440 minutes, right? But the human circadian rhythm, our actual internal biological clock, runs at about 24.2 hours, which is 1,452 minutes. So what's the difference there? It is exactly 12 minutes. Well, the code actually formalizes this 12-minute gap as an eon. And an eon is this foundational Gnostic constant defined mathematically as exactly 12. But here's where it gets crazy. The authors don't just stop at the clock. They map this constant perfectly to human respiration. 12 happens to be the standard resting breath rate floor for a mature human adult, 12 breaths per minute. So you have this incredibly abstract math aligning perfectly with these tiny slivers of human biology. And it scales all the way up to a full lifetime. If you look at the source file, Circadian Gnosis Alignment, it maps human life stages directly onto these aeon milestones. So infancy ends at 1 aeon, early childhood wraps up at 3, and it goes all the way up to maturity, which they actually call the void transition, beginning right at the 21st aeon.
This introduces a really fascinating concept they call Gnostic overdrive. Think about a newborn. They breathe so much faster, right? Somewhere between 30 and 60 breaths per minute. In this framework, that's an 8x multiple. But as we age, our biology literally downshifts. This state of childhood overdrive eventually decelerates, slowing down until we hit that fundamental biological baseline, the aeon floor of exactly 12 breaths per minute once we reach adulthood.
Which brings us to Section 3, the three-pillar ledger, focusing on consensus and trade-offs.
Okay. So here the code is defining reality's consensus mechanisms, but it's doing it without needing to rely on physical network cables or servers at all. It defines what it calls a strong ledger as having a vent of 0. Basically, that means absolutely zero mismatch, no rejection whatsoever. On the flip side, an eventual ledger has a positive vent, which means there is some slack, some messy physical reality actually present in the system.
So the absolute crucial point here boils down to this incredibly simple affine equation. W plus V equals R plus 1. Or in plain English, weight plus vent equals the budget plus the Kleeneman. This equation completely breaks down the complementarity trade-off. We're not talking about some complex, tangled curve here. It is a straight line where weight and rejection just beautifully exhaust the ledger's budget.
The source text actually frames this as nothing less than the structural mechanics of truth itself.
All right, moving into section 4, the universal +1 and structurally forced reality.
Remember that Kleeneman, that +1 we talked about earlier? Well, the code proves this incredible state of overdetermination. Check this out. When you take the base structural sizes of the no-nos constants, so you've got the luminary at 4, the hexad at 6, and the no-nos universe at 10, and you lift them by that Kleeneman, the +1, they perfectly equal 5, 7, and 11. And guys, these are not just random numbers. These are exactly the 3 Ramanujan special primes. No way, right?
The source text is absolutely adamant that this is not some numerical coincidence. It's a structurally forced alignment. That +1 acts as a bridge across a mathematical phase boundary. It literally takes those foundational structural sizes and lifts them straight up into these incredibly rare, specific prime numbers. And the authors, they don't just throw this claim out there, they formally prove it using what they call 4 exhaustive witness kinds. We're talking an empirical witness, a structural witness, an algebraic witness, and finally a Tower universal witness. They use all 4 to prove that this universal +1 is an absolute, mathematically necessary reality. It's definitely not just some mathematical fudge factor they slapped on at the end to make their equations balance out.
In fact, there is this fascinating quote straight from the source notes here. They say, 4 orthogonal proof paths converging on the same quantity is the opposite of a hack. This is overdetermination. I mean, the whole system just locks into place through completely independent formal logical proofs. According to this code base, the universe itself mathematically demands that +1.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, Reducing Reality to M2, the Cosmic Error Correction.
So here we are introduced to something called the master constraint identity. The idea is that literally everything in the universe reduces down to a 2x2 matrix. And this whole thing is entirely governed by what they call the golden discriminant, which is the fundamental number 5. This 5 acts as the ultimate mathematical anchor. It measures the exact distance between the observable trace, which is what you and I actually experience, and the hidden reality underneath it all.
The source text formally defines reality's final reduction through what it calls algebraic repair states. Basically, if reality somehow gets out of alignment, the code executes interventions to restore the invariant. So these incredibly complex cosmic states, things that ancient Gnosticism referred to as the pleroma and the barbelo, are defined in this code simply as algebraic repairs being made to this massive cosmic matrix. And to actually make this happen, the M2 mesh dictates 3 fundamental states that control literally all domain-specific dynamics in the universe. First, you have the hidden Fibonacci, which acts as the base field, kind of like the DNA of reality. Then you have the observable Lucas, which represents the trace or our actual lived experience. And finally, you've got the golden Venn, which is this irrational injection that just keeps the entire system moving forward.
So what's the grand takeaway here? Think about it. From the 12 breaths a minute you take while sitting there, to the way global economic ledgers balance out, all the way to the structural sizes of the cosmos lifting into those Ramanujan primes, it is all completely isomorphic to this single concept. Reality itself, according to this formal code, is essentially just one massive, self-referential M2 error correction loop.
Which, honestly, leaves us with a pretty staggering final thought. If our entire universe really is structurally forced by that +1 Klein into this massive error correction loop written in topological code, then what part of the code are you and I? I mean, are we the trace? Are we the vent? Are we the error being corrected? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the code.